Welcome to Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm your host, Greg Bluestein, along with your other host, Patricia Murphy, and we're here to unpack a wild, dramatic, emotional, unpredictable World Cup week in Georgia politics. It felt like, Patricia, everything was converging on us at once with the runoffs, with the special session, with everything that came out, the fallout of the general election campaign truly beginning now.
Greg, if we didn't have Europeans going across America for the first time and talking about Buc-ee's in a French accent, I would not have made it through this week.
And Helen, Georgia.
Exactly, yes. It is a German village.
Yes. Well, we have made it through this week, and this is time where we answer your questions in our Monday Mailbag episode. We can't wait to dive into all the questions, the comments, the feedback we've gotten over the last week. Some of the questions were predating before the runoff, so they're kind of moot now. But luckily, Shani B., our executive producer, has collected a lot of questions post-runoff for us to dig into. Shani B., what do we got?
All right, our first one is from Josh in Richmond Hill. He writes, why is Rick Jackson spending north of $100 million to win the Republican nomination for governor not receive the same national attention as Tom Steyer, spending a similar amount on his failed race in California?
That's a good question. I mean, it's not like we haven't given it attention, us in the local media. Maybe the national folks haven't woken up to that yet, but $100 million plus, $105 or $6 million total, seemingly bottomless resources. Patricia, a candidate who could spend even more. Tom Steyer did beat him out, at least during his primary. California was the most expensive election in the nation. Georgia was like the fourth.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, Texas is going to beat us, the Texas Senate race. There's some other expensive races around the country. But in the end, Georgia could be right up there.
Well, especially if you're talking about a single candidate using their own money. And I think that's a great question about Tom Steyer. I think that is sort of his identity is how much money he spent. And I think Rick Jackson, toward the end of his campaign, was getting into a little bit of a danger zone with voters about, is this only about money? I think his campaign managed to layer it in there, but it can be a double-edged sword to have all of that money because it does look like you are trying to buy an election, which is what I heard from a lot of Republicans who did not support Rick Jackson. However, I mean, the upside is much, much higher. For Rick Jackson, the question was, why did he spend $100 million? Because he can. And he will again. He has said he will spend as much as it takes. I promise you it's going to take more than $100 million to run against Democrats in November in Georgia. And also cue the other Republican campaigns starting to ask Rick Jackson's campaign, hey, will you be paying for the ground operation? Are you going to be paying for field offices all around the state? Because there's a lot of concern in the state that because Governor Kemp's political organization is soon to be off the field, and because the RNC is, divvying up what they've got, the Trump campaign is going to make their own decisions. Georgia Republicans now are thinking to themselves, maybe Rick Jackson could fund this whole thing for us. And Rick Jackson has said that he would. Yeah. So get ready for the cash deposits.
Really shows how the wealth could be a two-edged sword. We saw basically Burt Jones, one of his closing messages was that this guy's trying to buy the race, right? He's flooding you with ads and mailers and all this, and he can't be trusted. That argument obviously fell flat with the majority of Republican voters, but certainly we'll see that argument, and we already are, from Keisha Lance Bottoms, who is already calling Rick Jackson Georgia's Elon Musk. The Democratic Party of Georgia is bringing up other Republican self-funders like Guy Milner, right? In Georgia's not so distant past, Kelly Loeffler, who self-financed at least partly a big chunk of her campaign, at least in the early phases. So they're drawing comparisons between Rick Jackson and those Republican also-rans from yesteryear, but we also see the benefits of that, right? He can say, I'm a self-made man, and I've come up from rags to riches. I don't need lobbyists. I don't need to listen to the advice of well-heeled donors because I'm the one who's running my own campaign. And of course, as you mentioned, he's not shying away from it. We were at a campaign event where he had both a jet and a helicopter.
And trying to decide which one to take home. He took the helicopter. Also, I think, this is part of his identity. He's not shying away from his wealth. On the side of his campaign bus, it says from foster care to billionaire. This is his identity. And I think we have to ask ourselves, are voters really are they really going to reject a billionaire? They certainly didn't at the national level. And Donald Trump has been anything but quiet luxury. I mean, he is out there so far in front with his money. And Rick Jackson, yes, he's got a plane. Yes, he's got a helicopter. When he lands his helicopter at events, Republican voters think that's kind of cool. They also see in him a man who started from the lowest of the low in foster care, in Techwood homes in Atlanta, which for people who are not familiar with that, was government housing, and build this business. Now, I think there's going to be a lot to find out about his business. I'm sure we're going to find out a lot more from Democrats about his healthcare business. But for now, Rick Jackson is not just embracing it, but I would say kind of throwing his money around in any way necessary.
And who else landed their fancy jets at campaign events? President Donald Trump. So I don't think he'll shy away from that comparison, at least with a Republican crowd. Shani B, what else we got?
Next is an email from Greg in Valdosta. Greg. I thought you were in Atlanta. Did Kemp give his late endorsement for Burt Jones knowing it would turn off some MAGA-based voters to guarantee Trump couldn't take credit for 2 endorsement wins in the top Georgia campaigns? If so, great chess move.
Wow.
Greg, man. But I have seen these conspiracy theories that somehow the governor would would be willing to take a massive loss in order to help to feed his own candidate and diminish his own clout. No way. I mean, right, it's silly. But we are also in silly season in Georgia politics where there's conspiracy theories flying everywhere. I've seen that from a couple of Burt Jones, like social influence, media influencer types who are suggesting that. There's others who are also talking about a huge number of Democratic crossover voters helping Rick Jackson in the end. It would take a big number. You're not talking just 1 or 2. I mean, it would take a huge number in order to sway that. We've been through this. We haven't seen all the voting record numbers. We'll be going through those over the next week or two. But we heard that in 2022 when Brian Kemp and Brad Raffensperger soundly defeated Trump-backed challengers. Oh, it must have been crossover voters. And there were a few, but with a defeat that big, it needs more than a few. And this actually was not a squeaker, right? This was a pretty hefty Rick Jackson win that you can't chalk up to just a handful of swing voters who decided to go tip the balance here and there. And frankly, and we wrote about this, Patricia, both of us, in the AJC this week, Rick Jackson is a uniquely difficult candidate for Democrats. I think the Democrats in their heart of hearts would much rather face someone like Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, who's just a more conventional candidate, rather than Rick Jackson, who can dip into his wallet, who doesn't have a legislative history, who can campaign as an outsider.
Yeah, Rick Jackson also has this extremely emotional element to his rallies. Maybe we'll start to see that in some of his campaign commercials. He has cried at every single rally that I've seen of his.
Including his victory speech.
It's typically when he's talking about foster care or how he grew up or trying to help other kids in foster care or other people who he says kind of wants to give a voice to the voiceless. So there is a piece of Rick Jackson that does not come through in his campaign commercials, but may come through in the future. I do think to the caller's point of the question, I still think we need to know a little bit more about why Governor Kemp backed Burt Jones on Sunday morning. I honestly still don't quite understand it because he said it was because he would be the most electable. Well, 24 hours later, 48 hours later, the lieutenant governor lost by a rather large margin. It just didn't seem like a completely natural, expected move. Certainly nobody was calling for it. The governor inserted himself at the last minute. I would still love to know more about his thought process.
Good story idea. We've reported the edges of it. We've reported, obviously, the governor's argument at the time, of course, was he thought Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones would be more electable in November. He kind of pitted Burt Jones along with Derek Dooley as the two candidates he thought would do best in November. We'll see in November how the two ultimate winners ended up doing and what Kemp has to say about that.
Maybe he was right. We'll find out.
Maybe he was right. Maybe he wasn't. But we'll never know on that one front. But also, there's a lot of personalities to play. Right. It is a fact that two of the biggest operatives behind Rick Jackson's campaign Nick Ayers, Austin Chambers were also two of the forces behind David Perdue's challenge of Brian Kemp back in 2022. So there's no love lost there between some of the elements of leadership of Rick Jackson's campaign. But it's also a fact that Rick Jackson and Brian Kemp go way back. And they've had fundraisers and they've gotten along and they have a long history as well. So there's a lot more to dig into there. So thank you for giving us one more story idea.
I look forward to reading your story.
Shady B, what else we got?
All right, next is Reggie in Forsyth, who writes, Kemp endorsed Jones, Jones lost. And now the AJC is saying voters rebuked Kemp's vision for the Georgia GOP. Is Kemp's political influence actually finished, or is this being overstated?
I mean, we're not saying it's finished. We're saying for now that Georgia Republicans have rendered their verdicts on those dual visions. And frankly, you add in not just the Derek Dooley defeat and not just the Burt Jones defeat, but you also add the very clear rebuke from Republican legislative leaders saying to Brian Kemp, thanks but no thanks to the special legislative session to overhaul political boundaries, saying that we're not going to go forward with this. Both the Senate and the House Republican leaders, that's another big rebuke. So we're talking about a governor who was already a lame duck, but now you really feel it. He still, even though he was a lame duck, he entered this year still with a lot of political power, still with the clout to get things done under the Gold Dome. And now all that is a major question mark. And it's going to, we'll see what kind of impact that has on a legacy that includes a lot of Republican wish list items, a lot of successes in the eyes of his supporters, poll numbers that are uniformly strong among Republicans and even independent voters, and even a decent number of Democrats in the last AJC poll approved of Brian Kemp's tenure. So you take all that in one bucket, but you also take the fact that he's had a number of high-profile losses in just the last few weeks, Patricia.
Last few days, Greg.
Yeah.
I mean, Tuesday night, I wrote a column saying Brian Kemp was the biggest loser on Tuesday night. I'm sorry to say that, but don't shoot the messenger. It is interesting, though. I mean, Kemp still has people around the state who like him, who admire him. Derek Dooley would not have gotten into a runoff without Governor Kemp. Derek Dooley probably wouldn't have gotten into this race without Governor Kemp. But Kemp really was bolstering Dooley the whole entire time, did more than 90 events with him. The First Lady came along with Derek Dooley as well. So I don't think Derek Dooley would have ever have been a factor in this race, let alone pushing Mike Collins to a runoff, had Governor Kemp not been involved. Now, by that token, I think it does display questionable judgment to decide that this is how he wants to spend his time, and it is a winnable race. It ended up not being a winnable race, and but I don't think he's I don't think he's out of Republican politics if he doesn't want to be, just because these two endorsed candidates didn't get a big enough boost from him to get over the finish line. I think he's got a long record in Georgia, a lot of things that he can point to as 2 terms as governor that voters would respond to if he ran for something else in the future. So I don't think he doesn't have to be done if he doesn't want to be done.
Yeah, and should he choose to play a big role in November, he still could be all over the campaign trail, even with Rick Jackson and even with Mike Collins. Okay, Shani B, let's take a quick break. We have a lot more questions to get to. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to our Monday Mailbag episode of Politically Georgia. If you've got a question for us, we'd love to answer it. Email, text, call. Shani B, our executive producer, is standing by no matter what format you want. The number is 770-810-5297. You can also email us at politicallygeorgia@agc.com. We can't wait to hear from you. Speaking of, Shani B, what else we got?
We got a question from Brooke in Avondale Estates, who writes, Kemp called the special session, but reportedly can't force a redistricting vote if House Republicans don't want one. How does a governor end up in a position where he convenes a session and then can't control what happens inside of it?
Brooke, great question. We call that the separation of powers, right? He can call lawmakers back. He can't hold a gun to he can't make them do it, right? And so that's exactly what we saw, Brooke. From the get-go, I mean, weeks ago in May, when the governor first announced the special session for the day after the runoff, I mean, we started getting blown up from texts from lawmakers saying, oh, do we really? Not just Democrats, but also Republicans saying essentially, this is the special session that almost nobody wanted. They had to come back, they felt, to resolve an impasse over how Georgia counts its ballots. They did not have to go use the special session to redraw Georgia's political boundaries. It's too late to do so anyway for 2026 maps. Kemp ordered them to do so for 2028 maps. And we saw House Republicans and Senate Republicans. That was the bigger surprise to me, was that Senate Republicans quickly joined on to this call to say, no way. We instead are going to focus on the other things on their agenda. They're also going to ratify a gas tax break that the governor has already put into place and ended. And they're going to do some other issues along with the property tax, essentially. But the biggest ticket item, this redistricting, is off the table, and Kemp can't force them to do that.
No, although if you go back in time and look at the context in which the governor added redistricting to the special session, South Carolina, Alabama, Louisiana, Tennessee all agreed to go back into session to redraw their maps. And in many cases, those states have drawn black lawmakers out of their districts. They've eliminated black districts in their state. I think Alabama is a good example of that. And so the question, certainly from the White House, was, what about Georgia? Where's Georgia? Why is Georgia not redrawing their maps? They certainly could redraw. They could get rid of some black lawmakers if they wanted to. So Kemp, I think, in an attempt to move forward without really jamming redistricting for 26, said we're going to come into session. We'll add this to the special session in 2026, but it won't count until 2028. We're not going to deal with these districts for this election. It'll be for the next election, which then immediately led lawmakers to say, well, then why in the world are we doing it at all? Because they don't know who's going to be in the chamber. They didn't know what the political dynamic was going to look like. And lo and behold, now that it's June, the day after the runoff elections, the political dynamics have changed immensely. Donald Trump got into the race for Mike Collins, which is something that the governor was hoping the president would not do. The lieutenant governor has lost his race, so he won't be the governor when he was presiding all of the 2028 races anyway. And so I think the dynamics changed so significantly that Kemp just lost all arguments to force lawmakers to consider this. And lawmakers, again, they're thinking, hey, we're on the ballots in 2026. You are not. We are making this decision now.
Shani B., what else we got?
Here's a question from Corey in Brookhaven. Democrats keep pointing out that Georgia has never provided dedicated state operating funding for MARTA. Republicans keep demanding MARTA fix its safety problems. Can you actually have one without the other?
Corey, aren't we the big experiment for how that happens? I think it's true that MARTA is the biggest transit system in the nation without dedicated state operating funding. I think that's right. We are this anomaly because it's funded primarily through local taxes from Fulton and DeKalb County, and they're trying to add to that map with Clayton and maybe Gwinnett one day. But still primarily a Fulton DeKalb sort of initiative, and doesn't get big chunks of money from the state legislature like the New York and other big-time transit systems do. It doesn't have the same sort of giant tax base that it needs to go expand to other counties. And over the years, we've had these special local elections in places like Gwinnett and Cobb where the expansion of MARTA has been rebuffed. Patricia, a book can be written on all the twists and turns that MARTA has taken over the decades and the big political fight it took just to, allow the enabling legislation essentially to allow MARTA to go forward to begin with.
Yeah, MARTA is not just a transit system. It is a political battle whenever it is raised. And a big part of the problem for MARTA is that it gets involved, it gets in the middle of sort of like the city-state rivalry. There are statewide officials and state-level officials who are very reluctant to pay for anything for Atlanta. And people in Atlanta are saying, hey, this happens routinely in other states. I think the issue of MARTA, though, is becoming much more serious as we continue to see episodes of violence on MARTA, which could really reduce ridership. I think it already has reduced ridership in some cases. And it's something that I think will put a black eye on both the city and the state if it's not something that leaders at both levels can agree to. I don't anticipate significant state funds coming in to support MARTA. I just don't feel like state lawmakers are going to go down that road. But could they add funding for security? Could they add some sort of, third rail, if you will, third rail option for funding that they're not officially funding MARTA, but they are supporting that system because Atlanta is the economic driver for the entire state, and MARTA is a huge part of that.
Shani B., what else we got?
Here's a question from Jalen in Sugar Hill. Burt Jones's family company sued Rick Jackson for $100 million in defamation right in the middle of a runoff campaign. Now that Jones lost, what happens to that lawsuit?
Great question, Jalen. And remember, Rick Jackson also sued Burt Jones for defamation. It was it read more like a campaign memo than it did a lawsuit. Burt Jones's family's lawsuit read a lot more like a lawsuit than a campaign memo. That was something else. The short answer is these cases don't go away. It's not like, especially the Burt Jones family company one, which came from the family company, not from the campaign itself, not from the candidate themselves. So I think these lawsuits, we're going to continue to track them. I haven't seen significant movement in the cases yet, but these could go on for years, Patricia.
Yes, and that is actually one of the reasons I heard that either Jones or Jackson or both might withdraw this at some point, withdraw their suits, because then you do get into a whole legal quagmire, including discovery, turning over documents about your own company. These are two, particularly in the Jones family case, this is a family-owned, family-held company that does not have a lot of sort of like public visibility. And on the Jackson piece as well, I would say the same thing about Jackson Healthcare. And so there is a significant risk to getting into these lawsuits because it requires you to share a lot of your own information about your company and your operations. And so, but we'll see. I mean, there is no love lost between Burt Jones and Rick Jackson and those two campaigns. I was at the Jones campaign event on election night, and every single speaker took the opportunity to call Rick Jackson a liar and took the opportunity to say that there had been accusations made against the Jones family that were not just over the line, but totally unfair, deceptive, and unethical. And so I don't know. I didn't hear anybody withdrawing a lawsuit last night.
Yeah, there's a lot of still sore feelings out there. This is not the sort of kumbaya moment that Republicans might end up getting later on. There might be some unity event in September, or maybe even sooner than that. But we're not quite there yet on the GOP side. Shani B., do we have time for one more question?
We can squeeze one more in. It's going to be Justin in Cabbagetown. Donald Trump Jr. posted support for Rick Jackson even while his dad was endorsing Burt Jones. Is that just a family miscommunication, or is there actually a real split inside the Trump world over who they wanted to win the governor's race?
This was
such a great question.
Yeah, this is a great question. This was quite the moment, Patricia. We were both on Monday, the day before the runoff. We were both with Rick Jackson at the Ted Cruz event in this fancy venue in Alpharetta when we were both given the tip-off, like, something is coming. Stay tuned. Something from Trump world. So I'm like, is it Susie Wiles? I don't know. Is it J.D. Vance? And then next thing you know, there's this tweet from Donald Trump Jr. He's saying it's not an endorsement, but he's saying Rick Jackson's the type of patriot, in his words, that America could use more of.
The MAGA patriot.
MAGA patriot, someone who's done great in business and who'd be a great leader. We tweeted. It kind of sends shockwaves around the Georgia Republican world, at least. The Burt Jones people see it and get a little bit upset as well because it looks like it blunts the Donald Trump endorsement. Looks like it just muddies the waters just a bit. Donald Trump Jr. ends up sending a second tweet saying, this is not an endorsement, but the message was clear, was that, Rick Jackson has deep ties in MAGA world as well. And what also came out around that same time, Patricia, is that Rick Jackson made a second trip to meet with Donald Trump. That was this past Saturday. He flew to Trump National, Virginia, met with the president. We were told it was a productive conversation. We're not going to be told otherwise. We're not going to tell it was a terrible conversation. But since then, since Rick Jackson's victory, we've seen several social media posts from Donald Trump praising Rick Jackson, saying Burt Jones has a great future, not saying anything bad about Burt Jones, but praising Rick Jackson. And one of the social media posts also essentially said, and Rick Jackson ran as a Trump-like character, and Trump loved that.
Well, it's so fascinating because Donald Trump endorsed Burt Jones before Rick Jackson got into this race. He endorsed Burt Jones before Rick Jackson gave him $1 million for his campaign, and before Rick Jackson has come out and said that he would be Donald Trump's favorite governor. I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump kind of likes Rick Jackson. He made his own money. He made a whole lot of it. They share a lot of attributes in that way. And I will say the people who come to Rick Jackson's events and are really moved and motivated by him remind me so much of the Trump voters that I saw at Trump events. To them, it's a breath of fresh air, someone who doesn't have to do this, someone who's made his own money, although Donald Trump had a little family money to get started. There's such a strong Trump vibe, even though he's not the Trump endorsed candidate. Also, there are people in the Jackson campaign orbit who are very close with the Trump family. And so I wouldn't be at all surprised if this was sort of an election day mention, like, hey guys, it almost felt like white smoke at the Vatican. Like, hey, we're cool with him. Okay. Like, whoever wins, we're fine with it because we like both of these guys. And so I think it was a message to Trump voters to say, hey, we're not against this guy. In fact, we kind of like him.
That's also music to Democrats' ears because they are going to relentlessly tie Rick Jackson to Donald Trump and his sagging approval ratings, at least among Democrats and independent voters. Okay, that is all the time we have for a
great questions.
Very big and bursting Monday mailbag. If you found us on YouTube, welcome to our channel. We're glad to have you. And please click the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. You can also follow Politically Georgia on Apple, Spotify, any podcast platform that you like. Wherever you're listening, we always appreciate your comments, your ratings, your reviews, your feedback. PoliticallyGeorgia@ajc.com or Patricia.Murphy@ajc.com. We'll talk to you next time on Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.